What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a recap, reaction, analysis, and review of the pilot episode of one of my favorite television shows on streaming services right now, the Paramount Original Mayor of Kingstown. And I'm going to make a bit of an admission here. I actually prefer TV shows over films. It's a pretty new preference that I think started right around the time that streaming services became really popular. I like TV shows more than movies because TV shows tend to be more character driven than movies are. And I like the fact that you get to spend much more time with the characters, getting to know them on a much deeper level than you do in films. I'm also experimenting with different types of content on my channel. And so with that in mind, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So Mayor of Kingstown is an American crime thriller television series created by Taylor Sheridan and Hugh Dillon. And it follows the powerful McClusky family, power brokers in Kingstown, Michigan, where the business of incarceration is the only thriving industry. The show tackles themes of systemic racism, corruption, and inequality, and provides a stark look at the McCluskys' attempt to bring order and justice to a town that has little of either. The television show stars Jeremy Renner, Diane West, Hugh Dillon, Taylor Handley, Emma Laird, Derek Webster, Hamish Allen Headley, Forez Lass, Aidan Gillen, Kyle Chandler, and Nishi Munchie. Now, the series premiered on November 14th of 2021 on Paramount Plus. And in February of 2022, the series was renewed for a second season, which premiered on January 15th, 2023, with the third season of the series currently set to start filming in early 2024. Now, the show's first season is comprised of 10 episodes, as is the second, and at the time of the making of this video, it has a 42% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, though I want to make a point to mention that the audience score sits much higher at 91%. So do with that what you will. It also has a Metascore of just 55 on Metacritic based on just 19 critic reviews, but the audience score is a 7.7 based on 54 user ratings. And finally, the show has an 8.2 out of 10 on IMDb based on over 42,000 reviews. So, it's safe to say that while critics don't seem to like this show very much, the viewers do. Now, I went back and forth about whether I was going to make a single video reacting to and recapping the entirety of the show's first two seasons, but there's just so much to get into from a writing perspective that I just decided to make a video for the pilot, mostly because the pilot episode of a TV show is essentially the setup for the story, and it sets the tone for everything that comes after. And if you guys decide that you like longer form content like this, then I'll do more pilot breakdowns like this of my favorite television shows. So let's see how all this goes, right? So the title of the pilot episode of the series is simply put, The Mayor of Kingstown. Now, most TV pilots don't have titles, they're just titled pilot. But when they do have names, it's typically the name of the show. Now, this pilot episode has a runtime of 1 hour and 6 minutes, and it was written by Hugh Dillon, who plays Detective Ian Ferguson, in the series, and Taylor Sheridan, who also directed the pilot. And Taylor Sheridan has been doing a lot of work for the Paramount Network, with him being heavily involved in this show as a producer, writer, and director, and then with him working on Yellowstone and all of the Yellowstone spinoff shows. So, at the beginning of the pilot, we see a young kid practicing hitting a tennis ball with a tennis racket to Mike McClusky, played by Jeremy Renner. After he takes a practice swing, Mike sends him over to the other side of the field they're standing in to hit the ball over the wall of the nearby prison. As the boy hits the ball over the prison wall, we see a guard walk past the ball, followed by an inmate who picks up the ball and passes it to another inmate, who opens it with a makeshift knife, revealing drug paraphernalia. And as all this is going on, we hear Mike talking to us via voiceover. This is never what I wanted. Never where I thought I'd be. But then I've never been anywhere else. And when they sent me away, they just sent me right back here. Every member of my family fights this fight in one way or another. And so does every family that calls Kingstown home. So do a lot of families who will never call it home, but they live here anyway. Waiting, always waiting. Now it's up to me to keep the rats in their cage content and the keepers from becoming rats themselves. This is a company town, and the business is incarceration. 7 prisons in a 10-mile radius. 20,000 lost souls with no hope, no future. And I'm their link to a world that doesn't want them. I'm the life raft. I'm the mayor of Kingstown. So this is one of the ways to start a story, by giving the audience a bunch of information about the main character and the circumstances that they'll be facing. I call it a data dump. And if handled with care, they can be extremely effective. Now, I think this monologue was well written, even though it kind of gave away a bit of the plot of the show, of the pilot episode, but no more than the marketing materials did for the show, so I don't see it as a huge deal. But this monologue basically lets us know that Mike is an ex-con and that he's part of a family whose job it is to maintain the delicate balance between the town's criminal element and its law enforcement officials. So we have the basic information we need to process the scenes that will follow this one in the first episode of our story. Next, we see Mitch McClusky, the present mayor of Kingstown, played by Cal Chandler. That's my guy, by the way. But we find him sitting behind the desk in what looks like a rather meager office setup, talking to a father about protecting his son from the prison guards while he does time inside, as Mike stands in the corner as a witness. Now, when Mitch reminds the man that his son attacked a guard and that that's why they're harassing him, the man becomes angry. At which point Mike intervenes, reminding the man to remember who he's talking to. Now, this leads me to believe that Mitch is simply a manager of sorts and that Mike is more the muscle behind him. After the meeting ends, Mike leaves to take another meeting just as an attractive woman named Vera comes in, dressed professionally, telling Mitch that a man named Milo, who we find out is her currently incarcerated husband, needs him to retrieve some money for him and give it to her before she leaves the country for Estonia the next night. And that he is willing to pay Mitch $10,000 for his trouble. Now, Mitch tells Vera that they usually don't do this kind of thing and that he'll need to hear from Milo directly. Vera assures Mitch that Milo will be in touch. She then hands Mitch a map, and he has his assistant go make a copy for him. He looks at it, stating that the location is far away. Vera tells him that the county has purchased the land and that it will be auctioned off soon. Now, this is a small detail, but these are typically the kinds of small details that make a story great, so I thought to include it here. Anyway, Mitch reluctantly agrees to perform the service. Vera thanks Mitch and exits his office, and as she walks through the waiting area headed outside, Alberto, a mysterious, heavily tattooed Hispanic man, comments out loud that she is, and I quote, a fine-ass woman. From there, we see Mike at a local diner meeting with guards who work at the prison, where Tom Weaver, one of the black guards, a middle-aged man, tells Mike that his nephew, who is also a guard at the prison, has been buddying up with the black inmates inside and that he was convinced to mail a letter for one of them. Mike asks who the inmate is and Tom hands him a manila folder. Now, we don't see who the person is in the file, but it is mentioned that he is a Crip. Now, Mike tells Tom that he can get the letter back, but that there'll have to be a trade made for it, and that his nephew will have a target on his back for a while. The guards agree to Mike's plan, and Mike tells them that he'll handle it. Next, we see Miriam McClusky, the matriarch of the McClusky family, a college professor and a history teacher at the women's prison. We see her inside the prison presenting a lecture on the Civil War. telling inmates who are also students that the Civil War came about as a disagreement on states' rights. But it was much more than that. Miriam explains that it was a war for states' rights to decide their own position on slavery, that this was a war fought for the freedom to choose slavery. She also states that this was the only time in recorded history that the oppressors fought each other over the rights of the oppressed. Miriam then goes on to say how this was the most formative event in the nation's history, but that the catharsis of that Union victory and the freedom of the slaves was short-lived. As Miriam narrates, only a decade later, a new union of mostly imprisoned Confederate soldiers and immigrants reignited the genocide begun by Columbus some 400 years earlier. At the end of her class, a female inmate approaches her and tells her that she has a cousin that will be arriving at the prison soon and that she wondered if Miriam would ask her son, the mayor, for help. Now, Miriam cuts her off, telling her to never ask about her sons again. The female inmate becomes extremely anxious and apologizes, claiming that she meant no disrespect before hurrying out of the room. Now, these types of details are typically not included by accident, and I think that this particular subject was written into the script as a commentary on prison being a new form of slavery. And as we examine the dynamic between law enforcement and the prisoners over the course of the season and the show, I think you'll see how those placed in charge of the convicts constantly relieve them of their agency and even their dignity in order to achieve a desired result. Now, as Mike drives through town, he gets a call from Mitch telling him to meet him at the beach near the lake. Once there, Mitch tells Mike that Milo buried his tape from a past job on a plot of land and that they have to go and get it for him, but that Milo is willing to pay $10,000 for their trouble. Mike then tells Mitch about Tom Weaver's nephew mailing the unsanctioned letter for the inmate, to which Mike simply laughs and replies, "Fucking Mondays." So, we can assume that it's a Monday in the story, not that that seems to be of any extreme importance, but, there's that. Next, the pair take a trip to see Deveron Bunny Washington, and he's the head of the Crips and a known drug dealer in Kingstown. They ask him about the letter, and he tells them that his boy received it. He then asks if they want to trade for it. Now, Mitch and Mike agree to the trade initially, but Bunny wants them to help him get a kilo of drugs into the prison, which they refuse, offering to help him move only 2 ounces instead. Bunny eventually agrees to the deal, and as the pair walk back to the car, Bunny tells Mitch that if it wasn't for him, everyone would be dead. Mitch smiles at the thought before he and Mike get back in the car and drive away. Now, inside the prison, we see inmates in one of the cell blocks socializing. A loud buzzer goes off, and the inmates all head inside their cells for lockdown, all except one. Daryl Johnson, an African-American male, maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, lingers near his cell entrance as if he's waiting for someone. And we finally meet Tom Weaver's nephew, Sam, a young African-American male, closing cells behind the inmates, calling out the cell numbers as he goes. Now, when he finally approaches Daryl, he asks Sam for a favor. When Sam refuses, Daryl reminds him that he owns him for sending a letter containing $500 with tar and cocaine all over it to his friend, and that he can either be his bitch on the outside or he can make him his girl when they send him to the prison as an inmate. When Sam again refuses, not even knowing what the favor is, I might add, Daryl tells him that the DA will be reading his letter tomorrow, which prompts Sam to begin beating on the inmate with his nightstick. Once Sam has Daryl, subdued, he then headbutts the concrete wall inside the cell, injuring himself, and reports a 511, officer down. And within seconds, the additional officers arrive and continue beating Daryl. Next, we meet Kyle McClusky, a detective in the Kingstown Police Department, talking on the phone with Mitch about needing to see him. He is dressed in a suit as if he's about to step out. Now, he mentions on the phone that his wife is upset that he picked up a shift an hour before dinner. After he hangs up, he goes downstairs where we find his mother and his wife talking about cooking. His mother asks him why he took such a late shift, assuming that his brothers are the reason. He confirms his mother's suspicions before exiting the room, and he leaves his mother's. As he leaves, his mother tells him to be careful, which seems to bother him a bit. He comes back into the room asking why she told him to be careful, and his mother just reiterates the point that if he's helping his brothers with something, that he should indeed be careful. Now, this leads me to believe that Miriam isn't very enthusiastic about what Mitch and Mike do for a living, and that maybe she's trying to keep Kyle away from it. And this also makes me feel like Kyle might be the baby. Now, when Kyle arrives at the station, he finds Mitch sitting around talking and laughing with other detectives. And he stops and stands there watching his brother with a look of genuine admiration. This leads me to believe that Mitch is the oldest. Now, once Mitch turns and sees him, he gets up and tells the other detectives that they have to go, and the pair leave the building. Now, once outside, Kyle asks what the emergency is. Mitch tells Kyle that they have to go dig up money for Milo, to which Kyle asks, "Oh, we're not keeping that promise, are we?" Now, this leads me to believe that Kyle has been bending the law to help his brothers for some time, even though he doesn't seem happy about this particular endeavor. Now, Mitch tells Kyle that they are indeed going to do what they promised for Milo. He goes on to tell him that the money is buried in a place called Cottonwood Canyon. Kyle reminds Mitch that Cottonwood Canyon is now county land, so he doesn't understand why Mitch needs him. Mitch claims he simply needs Kyle to run interference in case the county sheriffs show up. When Kyle questions if Milo is okay with his plan, Mitch replies by simply stating, "That's the risk." Mitch gets into his car, but then he gets out again to tell Mike that when he gets the money, he needs to go back to the office and put it directly into the safe. So from there, we go clubbing. We're in the strip club. And this is where we discover that Milo's wife, Vera, is a stripper. So she's on stage dancing, and we see that Alberto, our tattooed gentleman from the office before, is sitting at the foot of the stage. And he's staring up at her as she performs, topless. He offers her money. She takes it, says thank you. And then he tells her that he wants her to come dance for him. She tells him that she'll find him when she's done on stage. So at this point, we're really interested in knowing who Alberto is and exactly what he's up to. While that's going on, we see Mike and Kyle walking through the woods in Cottonwood Canyon in the dead of night, no doubt going to dig up Milo's money. And this is the most important scene in the entire pilot episode because it's here that we get to learn what our main character wants. Kyle talks about an interview he had with the Michigan State Troopers and that he expects to hear good news from them in a couple of weeks. Mike seems happy for him, stating that the Troopers is his ticket out of the shithole that is Kingstown. Kyle asks Mike if he hates it so much, why doesn't he leave? Mike reminds Kyle that he's a felon with no skills, and so he feels stuck. He then tells Kyle about a cooking school in Wyoming that teaches cooking over campfire with 100% job placement after training. He tells Kyle that the pay isn't great, but that he doesn't need much. Finally, Mike tells Kyle that the one reason he's hesitant about cooking full-time in the wilderness is grizzly bears. The pair eventually happen across the spot that they're looking for, and Mike digs up Milo's money. They walk back to their cars, and Mike says to Kyle, "Let's go home," to which Kyle responds, "Roger that." Meanwhile, back at the club, Vera exits the stage and approaches Alberto, who's sitting alone at a table. She sits down next to him, and he asks to go to the jungle, which we find out is the VIP area in this particular club. So she tells him that he'll have to pay $150 up front and that she'll dance for 3 songs where she can be nude with no touching, or she can keep her dress on and he can touch her wherever he wants to. He asks which she would prefer, and she tells him she wants him to touch her. So she's trying to get at the bag. In the jungle room, shout out to the set decorator who literally had a neon sign that said jungle room on the wall in the shot. But in the VIP, Vera dances for Alberto as PM Dawn's Die Without You plays over the loudspeaker. Now, this song was probably chosen by the music supervisor for a reason. I'm guessing to convey the idea that Alberto is genuinely taken with Vera. And I'll just say it looks like she got him before the song was even over, if you know what I'm saying. So as the next song starts to play, which was Never Gonna Get It by En Vogue, again, playing on the sexual dynamic between the two, in my opinion, Alberto springs up, telling Vera that he's good, but that he'll see her again. And here's where the script supervisor made a little boo-boo, because he pays her as he tries to leave, but in the scene before, she said that he had to pay up front. So if that were true, she would have already been paid for the dances. But Vera stops him momentarily, grabbing him by the face, staring him in the eyes, and telling him that she doesn't want him to go yet. Now, here, I'm not exactly what game she was running, because after having been paid in full for the 3 songs, I don't know why she wouldn't just say goodbye and take the free cash. Maybe she thought he was cute and the right amount of dangerous, and with her husband Milo being locked up, she might have been down to take her show on the road, if you know what I'm saying. Now, at the prison, we see Sam getting stitched up by a doctor as his uncle and Captain Moore, played by Michael Beach, stand nearby. They ask the doctor if he thinks Sam might be concussed, and the doctor answers no. At that point, Captain Moore asks Sam to walk him through what happened. Now, Sam does, and Captain Moore tells him that he made mistakes in how he handled the situation, and that he's reassigning Sam to the tower on the yard for his protection. Now, back at the club, we see Vera leaving for the night, and we notice that Alberto has been waiting in the parking lot for her to finish her shift, and he follows her home. Vera comes home to an understated house. She undresses and puts on a t-shirt and panties. And as she sits on her bed eating and watching television, Alberto appears leaning against the open bedroom door. He tells her that he saw her earlier in the mayor's office and that she still owes him 2 dances. She tells him to come back to the club and she'll give them to him. At this point, there's a close-up on Alberto's face, and I notice that he has a teardrop near his eye, which usually means a person has killed someone before. Anyway, Alberto tells Vera that he wants his dances now. She looks at him and says, okay. At that point, Vera slowly sets her bowl on a nightstand and quickly pulls a gun out of the nightstand drawer, pointing it at Alberto. But he tackles her before she can get a clean shot off, and he wrestles the gun away from her, punching her in the face, incapacitating her. And after the altercation, Alberto goes through Vera's things and finds a copy of the map that she gave Mitch to locate Milo's money. He refers to the find as the mother lode and claims the money for himself. And as he gets up to leave the apartment, we see that Vera is laying on her bedroom floor and that she's dead. So next, we see Mike and Kyle in Mitch's office putting the cash in the safe. Kyle complains that his actual shift starts soon and asks Mike to hurry up. Mike closes the safe and offers his brother some coffee as the pair exit the room. With the sun starting to rise in the distance, we see Mike and Kyle driving through town. They receive a call from Mitch asking if they found the money. Mike tells him that they indeed found the cash and that they put it in the safe in Mitch's office. Mitch asks if it was all there, and Mike tells Mitch that he didn't count it. Mitch then asks Mike if he needs some rest before going to meet Bunny to help him move the drugs as they previously agreed. Mike explains to Mitch that Bunny probably isn't awake yet. Mitch responds by telling Mike that something happened last night and that he needs the drugs moved today. And what Mitch is talking about here is the altercation between Sam and Daryl. So he wants to move the drugs for Bunny sooner rather than later as maybe some kind of a peace offering. Now, when Mike asks what happened, Mitch says he'll tell him at the office. So Mitch arrives at the office and is immediately accosted by Alberto. As he presses the gun he took from Vera to Mitch's head, asking him what the paper is he stole from Vera's apartment, Mitch tells Alberto that it's a map. Alberto asks for what? Money, right? And Mitch responds, that's correct. Alberto asks where the money is. Mitch tells him that it should be in the safe. Alberto tells Mitch that he's pretty agreeable. Mitch responds, well, I wouldn't die protecting my own money. I'm sure as hell not going to die protecting somebody else's. When Alberto asks who the money belongs to, Mitch tells him, someone you don't want to steal from, but that's between you and him. Alberto then instructs Mitch to open the safe. After Mitch does so, taking the money out and tossing it over to him, Alberto says to Mitch, it ain't going to be between me and whoever, because whoever ain't going to know it was me. And then he shoots Mitch in the back of the head, taking the money and exiting the building. Now, later that morning, Mike arrives at Bunny's place and tells him that the FedEx, aka the package, has to be sent today. When Bunny asks why, Mitch tells him to talk to the mayor. Bunny explains that Mitch hasn't been picking up all morning. When Mike attempts to take his phone out of his pocket to call him, Bunny and the other gang members draw down on him, causing Mike to take a gun from one of Bunny's boys and hold it on him until the others put down their weapons. Bunny reminds Mike that they made a trade, but that the guards worked over his friend Daryl. Mike claims to know nothing about the incident, but reminds Bunny that they never break a deal, because everybody has to trust everybody in order to maintain the balance. Now, after everybody calms down, Mike gives Bunny back the gun and tells him that he'll call Mitch and find out what happened. And as he walks away from the group towards his car, Bunny tells Mitch that Daryl is actually his cousin and that he may die from his injuries. As Mike gets in his car, he says to Bunny, "Everybody is somebody's cousin in this fucking town." As Mike drives through town, he calls Mitch, getting his voicemail. He leaves a frantic voicemail asking Mitch where he is, telling him that the Crips just tried to kill him and that getting a letter back is now going to be a pain in the ass. Finally yelling at Mitch to pick up his phone. As he arrives at the office, he sees police everywhere. He exits the vehicle and Ian Ferguson, a detective in the Kingstown Police Department, tries to corral him before he can enter the crime scene. A few moments later, Mike knows that his brother is dead, and he asks Ian how. Ian tells him that it was quick to the back of the head, and Mike, overcome with emotion, pushes past Ian and enters the scene against his advice. So once inside, we see Kyle sitting in the waiting room, clearly saddened by what has happened. Mike looks at the scene, turning to Ian, asking, "What the fuck?" Ian tells him that Vera was found dead in her house last night and that she was assaulted and strangled. And that the same guy that shot Mitch's fingerprints were all over her place too. He tells Mike that he doesn't know what's going on, but that he isn't going to be able to hide the link between the two crimes. He then tells Mike that the incident needs to stay with just Mitch, and Mike agrees. Mike then tells Ian that he needs to see the inside of the room where his brother was shot. And after some jostling, Ian agrees to let him enter the actual crime scene. And he sits there staring at his brother's dead body as the police continue to take pictures. Now, next we see Mike sitting in the waiting area with Kyle, who's still a little bit emotional. He blames Mike and Mitch for helping the prisoners, telling him that what happened was inevitable. He says to Mike, "I always knew this would happen. I just thought it would happen to you." Kyle then gets up and exits the room, leaving Mitch sitting there alone. In the next scene, we see Miriam back at the prison teaching her class. In this scene, she talks about the Cherokee being moved further west to Oklahoma, telling a story of how the Cherokee were forced to abandon their dogs, who they see not as pets but as guides with souls of their ancestors, when made to cross the Mississippi River. Now, Miriam continues as several of the students are seen crying, telling them that the dogs howled and leaped into the river and drowned while trying to reach their families. At that moment, a woman comes into the classroom with a somber look on her face, asking to speak to Miriam in the hall in private. Miriam has a look of worry on her face as she slowly follows the woman out into the hall. Now, I'm not sure why they changed this, but this story comes from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and is a first-person account of this particular event. However, Tocqueville's story involves the Choctaw Indians instead of the Cherokee. But later, we see that the police have found where Alberto is hiding. We see that SWAT is stationed outside the home in tactical gear as Mike pulls up. Ian again moves quickly to corral him. Mike begs Ian to let him handle the situation as he chokes back tears. Ian tells him that he can't allow him to interfere. Mike explains that if Alberto goes to prison, that he can't touch him because they don't work with the mafia, meaning the Mexicans. I don't know why they don't work with the Mexicans, but okay. And Mike can't stomach the idea that his brother's murderer will spend the rest of his life with his feet up, laughing about what he's done. Ian then promises Mike that if Alberto was alone in the house, that he will never get off the couch, which seems to placate him enough to allow the cops to do their job without continued protest. Now, the cops kick in the door, and they indeed find Alberto on his couch, smoking weed from a pipe. He looks startled as 4 SWAT members quickly surround him. Robert Sawyer, the SWAT team leader, tells Alberto to pick his gun up and point it towards the ceiling, which he does. He then tells Alberto to slowly bring it down and point it at him, which he also does, which prompts every member of the team to open fire on him, killing him almost instantly. Now, as the team exits the house, Robert gives Ian a thumbs up. Ian then goes over to Mike and tells him that everything went well and that Alberto saw it coming, which seems to make Mike feel a little bit better. Later, we see Mike sitting alone in a bar. He's approached by a man called Joseph, the Russian. Joseph asks Mike where the money is, and Mike tells him that the police have it. Joseph asks if he can get it, and Mike tells him no. Joseph begins to explain that this will be a problem for him before Mike suddenly attacks him, as everyone else in the bar looks on, like nothing out of ordinary is happening. And as Joseph lay down on the ground, his face bleeding with Mike standing over him, his gun pointed down at him, Mike tells Joseph that they killed Milo's wife, that they found the map, and then they killed his brother. He goes on to tell Joseph that everyone knew his brother was off limits. He explains that if Milo wants to blame him for what's happened, that he will have him killed in his cell. And then he asks Joseph if he understands. Joseph doesn't answer, but Mike goes on to tell him that everything Mitch gave Milo, he can take away in an afternoon. Then he warns Joseph to never threaten him again before putting his gun away and walking out the door. Now, next, we see Mike speeding down the highway as his phone rings over and over and over again. Mike seems angrier with each call, driving faster and faster towards his destination, but he finally gets to a spot where there's no cell service and the ringing suddenly stops, which seems to calm him down a bit. We then see his car parked outside of a secluded cabin. He grabs a beer and sits on his front porch, staring out at the woods around him. Now, after a few moments, he spots a bear approaching from the woods. The bear begins eating trash off of a garbage can lid turned upside down on top of a wooden post. And Mike, startled at the sight, raises his weapon, pointing it at the bear cub, but after watching the bear for a few moments, he decides not to shoot it. And here I think the bear actually represents Mike. Mike realizes that the bear is only surviving in the way he knows how, much like himself, and that his fear is not of the bear, but of his own mortality. Like a bear in the wilderness, Mike is a product of his own environment. He was raised in a town where prisons are the biggest businesses, and he is working to survive within that dynamic. Like the bear, Mike is scavenging for his livelihood the best way he can, and like his brother, he does so with an ever-present target on his back. Now, we see Miriam next sitting at home on her couch, no doubt still mourning the death of her son. Now, Mike arrives, and as he walks through the door, his mother says, "Dawn." She then asks, "Have you ever come home once before dawn?" Mike responds, "Look, Mom, I don't," before his mother interrupts him and says, "I don't either, Michael. What is there to say?" Then, as Mike stands there, his mother goes on to say, "He's gone, in the manner we all imagined. This will be your way too, you know." Mike responds, "Ma, we don't break the law. You know that. We bend it to make peace for everybody." His mother continues, "I'm so familiar with what you do. Your father invented it. But don't delude yourself into thinking that any of this is for the common good. You worked incredibly hard to accomplish absolutely nothing. You prolonged the inevitable. You're couriers, fix-it men, part-time gangsters. And you think because you don't make much money that that's noble. Mitch, God rest your soul, how I loved him, was arrogant and lazy. I know why he did it. For the attention, for the power. But for the life of me, I'll never understand why you do it. You hate it. You hate this town. You have no friends. and all you've done since you were a little boy is dream of leaving. And here you are. Now, Mike thinks, swallowing hard before responding, what am I supposed to do, Ma? I don't know how to leave. And Miriam responds, Michael, you just go. Now, Mike thinks for a moment before walking out of the house, closing the door behind him. And, lastly, we see Mike and Kyle entering the building, where Mitch's office was once more. Mike enters Mitch's office alone. He opens the safe, taking a rather large sum of money out and placing a gun inside before locking it again. Now, as the pair exit the building, they're approached by a woman who seems frantic, and she explains, I was told you can help me. My daughter, she's in the women's prison, and she's in real trouble. I told her to talk to the guards, but she says to come see you. Now, Kyle interrupts the woman saying, you've got the wrong guy, ma'am. She asks, aren't you the mayor? Mike responds, that was my brother. The woman looks empathetic, replying, I was sorry to read that in the newspaper. Mike responds, yeah, thank you. The woman goes on, my daughter said to see you. She said you're the mayor now. Mike responds, I'm sorry, but she's wrong. And as Mike turns and walks away, with Kyle on his heels, the woman shouts out, so what do I do? And Mike turns and responds, I don't know. The woman becomes hysterical, shouting, sir, you don't understand, please. I don't know what they're going to do to her. I don't know what she'll do, please. Mike stops. He stares at Kyle. And then Kyle says, Mike, this isn't for you. Let's go. Kyle begins moving towards the car again as Mike stands there, staring at the woman before asking, what's her name? And that's where we cut to black and roll the end credits on the pilot episode. So, in closing, I think this was a really strong starting point to a show that had an amazing first season and a very good second season to boot. I do think there was a bit of story regression in the show's second season, so I hope that isn't indicative of the show running out of road already. Despite that fact, I'm still interested and invested in the show's third season, so we'll see what the showrunners have in store for Mike McClusky and his family. Now, at this point in the show's run, I would still label it as appointment viewing. And one of the better crime, they're calling it a crime thriller, but it's a crime drama on television right now. I think the writing is good. I think the acting is actually great. And the show has a darkness when it comes to tone that really kind of, drapes itself over the entirety of the show. And it makes you empathize with the characters on all sides of these particular issues, which I do think bode extremely well for the show's overall longevity. But what do you guys think? Do you think Mayor of Kingstown has been a show worth watching by the episode to this point? Or do you see the show as a typical run-of-the-mill crime drama only worth binging season by season over the course of a weekend or two? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you who might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. I'll catch y'all in the next video.